Somewhere between the third and fourth spiral arm of the Milky Way, a small metal buoy floated in absolute darkness. It had been drifting for 12,000 years. Its job was simple: fly to the yellow star called Sol, find the third planet, and send a signal. An invitation. A welcome into the galactic community. But the buoy never made it. A chunk of ice knocked it off course during the early days of its journey, and it tumbled silently into the Oort cloud, where it froze and forgot its purpose. Nobody came looking for it. Nobody noticed it was missing, and so Earth grew up alone. Dara Ose learned this fact while standing inside an alien customs office that smelled like burnt sugar and ozone. She was 40 years old, an engineer by trade, and the senior communications officer aboard the research vessel Ahimsa. 3 days ago, her ship had dropped out of warp near a massive ring-shaped station called the Lattice Ring, and everything humanity believed about the universe had shattered like cheap glass. The galaxy was full of people, thousands of species, millions of worlds, trade routes and treaties, and wars and music and art and politics, all happening for millennia while Earth fought its wars and built its cities and stared up at the sky wondering if anyone was out there. The answer had always been yes. They just never bothered to check if the invitation arrived. The customs officer was an Idhari, a being that looked like a praying mantis made of polished bronze. It clicked its mandibles and studied a glowing screen. "There is no file for your species," it said. "No entry. No record." "We know," Dar said. "You developed faster than light travel independently." "Yes." The Idhari paused. Its compound eyes reflected Dara's face back at her in 100 tiny fragments. "That is extremely unusual. How did you manage it?" Dara thought about the decades of failed experiments, the scientists who died testing early prototypes, the political fights over funding, the sheer stubborn refusal to accept that the stars were out of reach. "We kept trying until it worked," she said. The Idhari classified Earth as a feral civilization. The word was technical, not personal, but it landed like a slap. Feral meant uncontacted, unguided, a species that had clawed its way into space without help, without blueprints, without the uplift package that every other civilization received as a birthright. The Idhari gave the Ahimsa a temporary berth at the edge of the station and assigned a monitoring team to observe the crew. Over the next 2 days, Dara and her people were studied like lab specimens. Aliens in protective suits scanned their bodies, tested their air, analyzed their food. A tall, feathered being from a species called the Rethani watched the humans exercise in the ship's cargo bay and took detailed notes on their physical capabilities. A group of small, translucent creatures called Sorcerer pressed themselves against the observation glass and stared with wide, wet eyes. Dara let it happen. She had no leverage to refuse. On the third day, she was invited to tour the Lattice Ring. The station was enormous, home to over 2 million beings from dozens of species. There were markets selling things Dara couldn't name, parks filled with plants that glowed in colors she had never seen, and transit systems that moved faster than anything on Earth. Everything was clean, efficient, and ancient. This station had been operating for longer than human civilization had existed. She ended up in a vast hall lined with holographic displays showing a map of the galaxy. Every known species was marked. Every trade route, every alliance, every conflict zone. Dara stood there for a long time, looking at the map, looking at the empty space where Sol should have been. The young Idhari attendant noticed her staring. "Is something wrong?" it asked. "We should have been on this map," Dara said quietly. 12,000 years ago, someone should have come for us." The attendant shifted uncomfortably. "These things happen. The galaxy is very large." Dara nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She just stood there, a small woman in a worn flight suit, surrounded by the proof of everything her species had missed. The plagues they could have prevented. The wars they might have avoided. The centuries of suffering that a single working buoy could have changed. She thought about the people back home who would hear this news. The billions who had looked up at the stars their whole lives, hoping, wondering, praying for a sign. And the sign had been sent. It just never arrived. Something shifted inside her. Not anger exactly, Anger was loud and hot, and it burned out fast. This was quieter, colder. It was the feeling of a door closing and another one opening. The Concord, the governing body that ran this sector of the galaxy, offered humanity observer status. It was the lowest possible rank. No trade rights, no agencia oligibility, no voice in any decision. Just permission to exist in the area without being forcibly removed. Dara accepted it the same way she accepted everything else that week. With a calm face and a steady voice and a fire building behind her ribs, that night, alone in her quarters aboard the Ahimsa, she pulled up the galactic map on her personal screen. She didn't look at the wealthy systems or the powerful ones. She looked at the edges, the forgotten places, the systems with unanswered distress beacons and failing colonies and dying worlds, places the galaxy had overlooked. Just like Earth, she started making a list. If nobody else is going to answer, she said to the empty room, then we will. The rumor moved faster than light. A feral species had walked into the lattice ring, built its own warp drive from nothing, and asked for a seat at the table. Within a week, every station, colony, and outpost in the sector was talking about the strange, soft-skinned creatures from the forgotten yellow star. Most of the talk was not kind. Dara Ose heard the whispers everywhere she went. In the market corridors, vendors pulled their goods back when humans approached. In the transit tubes, other species moved to the far end of the car. A Red Hani soldier spat on the ground as Riku Tanaka walked past, and when Rika looked up, the soldier stared him down with burning orange eyes. Feral, the soldier said like the word tasted good. Riku kept walking. He was the Ahimsa's medic, a quiet man with steady hands and a voice that never rose above a conversational tone. He had spent 20 years treating patients in disaster zones on Earth, and he had learned long ago that dignity was not something other people could take from you. You had to give it away yourself. The regional Concord summoned Dara to speak. The chamber was a vast bowl carved into the heart of the lattice ring, with hundreds of seats arranged in rising tiers. Each seat was built for a different body. Curved shells for the sorcerer, who needed to stay wet. Reinforced platforms for the Red Hani, who were heavy and proud. Suspended nets for a winged species that never touched the ground. And in the center, a speaking floor made of polished black stone. There was no seat for humanity. There had never been a reason to build one. Dara walked to the center and looked up at the assembled delegates. She was short by human standards and utterly tiny compared to most of the beings watching her. She wore her flight suit because she didn't own anything formal. Her hair was pulled back, and her boots were scuffed from 3 years of shipboard life. She didn't beg. She didn't apologize. She told them about Earth. She told them about the ice ages and the famines, the plagues that killed millions and the wars that killed millions more. She told them about the floods and the droughts and the century when humanity nearly choked on its own pollution. She told them about children being born in rubble and old people dying in heat waves and entire cities vanishing under rising seas. And then she told them what happened next. She told them about the doctors who walked into plague zones without protection because someone had to. The engineers who built water systems in deserts. The teachers who held classes in bombed-out buildings. The musicians who played in the streets during air raids because silence was worse than fear. We didn't have help, Dar said. We didn't have uplift packages or galactic medicine or anyone telling us it would be okay. We had each other. That's all. And it was enough. The chamber was quiet. Not the respectful quiet of beings who had been moved. The calculating quiet of beings who were deciding whether she was a threat. Afterwards, the delegates voted. Observer status was confirmed. Lowest rank. No rights, no voice, no protection. Dara accepted it with a nod and left the chamber without looking back. While Dara dealt with politics, Riku found something that mattered more in the lower levels of the lattice ring. Where the air was thicker and the lights were dimmer, there was a medical ward for species that couldn't afford proper care. Riku wandered in because he heard a sound that he recognized across any species barrier. A child crying. The child was Fenari, a small fox-like being with golden fur and dark eyes that were clouded with pain. Her mother held her tight, rocking back and forth. The ward's single medical drone hovered nearby. Useless. It had flagged the condition as untreatable. Riku knelt down and ran his portable scanner over the child. The nerve pathways in her legs were degrading. The myelin sheaths were breaking down, slowly disconnecting her brain from her body. He had seen this pattern before. On Earth, they called it demyelination. Humans had solved it 30 years ago. "I can help," Riku said. The mother pulled her child closer. Her ears flattened against her skull. "You are the feral ones." "Yes," Riku said. He didn't argue with the word. "But I'm also a doctor." He spent 6 hours in that ward. He synthesized a treatment from the Ahimsa's medical stores, adapted the dosage for Fenari biology using guesswork and prayer, and administered it with hands that did not shake. By morning, the cloudiness in the child's eyes had begun to clear. The mother stared at him with an expression he couldn't read. Then she reached out and pressed her small, furred hand against his chest, right over his heart. "Why?" she asked. "Because she was hurting," Rikus said. "And I could stop it." News of the feral doctor in the lower wards spread quietly, the way important things often do. Not through official channels or galactic press. Through whispers between parents and patients and people who had been told that their problems were not worth solving. Back aboard the Ahimsa, Dara sat alone with her list of forgotten systems. She added 3 more entries. A colony with failing crops. A station running out of clean water. A convoy of refugees that nobody would take in. Her crew gathered around the table. Riku, Bina Asha, their soil scientist. The pilots, the mechanics, the volunteers who had left Earth knowing they might never go back. "This is going to be hard," Doris said. "We have almost nothing. No allies, no funding, no support." Bina smiled. "So, it's exactly like home, then?" Nobody laughed, but everybody nodded. The first distress beacon had been broadcasting for 11 years. 11 years of a signal screaming into the void, begging anyone to come, and the galaxy had treated it like background noise. Dara Ose stared at the beacon's data on her screen and felt something tighten in her throat. The signal came from a Fenari agricultural colony on a small moon called Reth 4. A mining accident had poisoned their soil over a decade ago. Crops died. Food ran out. They filed 17 appeals to the regional Concord. Every single one was marked as pending review. 11 years of pending review, while people starved. The Ahimsa jumped to Reth 4 with 3 other ships. The Holdfast, an old cargo hauler with patched-up engines. The Small Hours, a science vessel barely bigger than a shuttle. And the Clementine, a refitted transport that rattled like a tin can every time it dropped out of warp. Together, they looked less like a rescue fleet and more like a floating junkyard. The galactic press called it the Feral Mercy Run. They meant it as a joke. Reth 4 was worse than the report suggested. The colony was a cluster of low buildings surrounded by dead fields. The soil was gray and powdery, poisoned by heavy metals that had leaked from an abandoned mine shaft. The Fenari colonists, small fox-like beings with golden fur, stood at the edge of their settlement and watched the human ships land with expressions that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. Bina Asha was the first one off the ship. She was the Ahimsa's soil scientist, a woman who had spent her career restoring damaged farmland on Earth. She had fixed salt-poisoned fields in Bangladesh, rebuilt topsoil in the Sahel, and nursed dead volcanic ground back to life in Iceland. She knelt in the gray dust of Reth 4 and ran it through her fingers. "This is fixable," she said. The Fenari colony leader, a thin old male named Pell, shook his head. The Concord said the contamination was permanent. The Concord was wrong, Bina said. She introduced techniques that were ancient by Earth standards. Composting, mycorrhizal networks, crop rotation using nitrogen-fixing plants adapted from the colony's own native species. She worked 18-hour days, shoulder-deep in toxic dirt, teaching Fenari farmers how to build something from nothing. Within 2 weeks, the first green shoots broke through the gray soil. Pell stood in his field and wept without making a sound. While Bina worked on Reth 4, Riku Tanaka took the Holdfast to a deep space station called the Quiet Post. The station was home to the Sorcerer, translucent aquatic beings who lived in water-filled chambers connected by pressurized tunnels. Their water filtration system had failed 8 months ago, and the water was slowly turning toxic. They had sent requests for replacement parts to every trade hub in the sector. The answer was always the same. The parts were available, but the cost was not justified for such a small station. Riku and his team spent 3 days in the holdfast machine shop, fabricating replacement filters from scrap metal and salvage components. The work was ugly and imprecise, nothing like the elegant alien technology it was replacing. But it worked. Clean water flowed through the quiet post for the first time in months, and the sorcerer sang. The sound traveled through the water and vibrated through the station's walls, and Riku felt it in his bones like a second heartbeat. "Why did you come?" the station's elder asked him through a translation device. "Because someone should have come 8 months ago," Riku said. The third mission was the hardest. The Clementine found the Vellani refugee convoy drifting in open space between two systems. The Vellani were tall, gray-skinned beings with deep-set eyes and long fingers built for precision work. A territorial war between two larger powers had swallowed their homeworld, and they had been running ever since. 40 ships, 6,000 people, no food, almost no fuel, and every station they approached turned them away. Dara docked the Clementine alongside the convoy's lead ship and opened the cargo doors. The humans shared everything they had: food, water, medical supplies, fuel cells pulled from the Ahimsa's reserves, which meant Dara's own ship would be running on fumes for the return trip. The Vellani captain was an old soldier named OSA. She had scars on her face and hands, and a way of looking at people that suggested she had stopped expecting kindness a long time ago. She stood in the Clementine's cargo bay, watching humans carry supplies to her people, and her expression didn't change. "What is the price?" OSA asked. "There's no price," Doris said. "Everything has a price. In this galaxy, nothing is free." Dara thought about it. She could have said something noble, something about human values or the duty to help those in need. Instead, she told the truth. "We were forgotten too," Doris said. "For 12,000 years, nobody came for us. Nobody answered. We know what that silence feels like, and we decided we wouldn't do that to anyone else." OSA studied her for a long time. Then she reached out and gripped Dara's hand, her long gray fingers wrapping around Dara's smaller brown ones. "Then perhaps, when the time comes," OSA said, "you will have a friend." Back at the Lattice Ring, a Fenari journalist named Sally published a report titled "The Feral Ones Who Came When Nobody Else Would." It spread across the sector in hours. Millions read it. Most of them had never heard of Earth before. The Concord noticed. Not with gratitude or admiration, with suspicion. In their experience, nobody helped others for free. Charity always had a hidden cost. And a feral species building loyalty among the galaxy's forgotten people was something that needed to be watched very carefully. Dara didn't care. She had more beacons to answer. The word that changed everything was imperialism. A Rethani officer named Gon said it during a Concord session, and it spread through the political halls of the Lattice Ring like fire through dry grass. "The feral species is buying loyalty," Gon said to the assembled delegates. He was enormous, even by Rethani standards. His feathered body was covered in old scars, and his 4 eyes burned with the steady anger of someone who had fought for everything he owned. They give food to the hungry, medicine to the sick, fuel to the stranded, and in return, they collect allies. This is not charity. This is soft imperialism, and we are watching it happen. The chamber murmured in agreement. A formal investigation was launched into human activities. Dara was ordered to appear before an inquiry board. At the same time, something unexpected happened. The Pale Ones broke their silence. The Pale Ones were the oldest known species in the sector. Nobody knew exactly how old. They were tall, thin beings with skin like white paper and eyes that looked like they had seen the birth of stars. They almost never spoke to younger species. They watched. They waited. They kept their own council in towers that floated at the edge of known space. But now, for the first time in 300 years, they sent an envoy. A single being named Lyrith arrived at the Lattice Ring and requested permission to board the Ahimsa. No explanation was given. Dara granted it, because refusing a pale one seemed like a spectacularly bad idea. Lirith was unsettling, tall enough to duck through every doorway on the ship, with a face that showed no expression and a voice that sounded like wind moving through an empty building. Lirith said nothing for the first 2 days. Just watched, followed the crew through their routines, stood in corners and observed with those ancient, bottomless eyes. The inquiry was brutal. Delegates from a dozen species questioned Dara for hours. Why had humanity helped the Fenari colony? What agreements were made with the Villani refugees? Were the Sorcerer now indebted to Earth? Every act of kindness was examined under the cold light of political suspicion. We helped because they needed help, Dara said for the 20th time. Gon leaned forward. Nobody acts without self-interest. Not in this galaxy. Not in any galaxy. Tell us what you really want. Dara looked at him. She was tired. She had barely slept in weeks. Her ship was held together with patches and stubbornness. And now she was being interrogated for the crime of answering distress calls that everyone else had ignored. Where we come from, she said quietly, decency is not a strategy. It is how we survived. When the floods came, we helped each other. When the plagues came, we helped each other. When everything fell apart, the only thing that kept us alive was the decision to not let each other die alone. You can call that imperialism if you want. We call it being human. The inquiry ended without a ruling. The delegates needed time to deliberate. But time was something the galaxy did not have. 3 days later, a priority alert hit every system in the sector. A massive solar flare was building in a system called Keth 7, home to the Tyrak, a peaceful species known for building cities out of living glass. The flare would hit within 48 hours. 14,000 Tyrak lived on the planet's surface. Evacuation was the only option. The Concord ran the numbers. An evacuation fleet would cost resources, fuel, and political capital. The Tyrak were a small species with no military power and little economic value. The cost-benefit analysis came back negative. They decided to let the Tyrak die. Dara found out because Lirith told her. The Pale One walked into her quarters, spoke for the first time in 3 days, and delivered the news in that empty wind voice. The Concord has chosen not to act, Lirith said. 14,000 will burn. Dara was already moving. She hit the ship-wide comm before Lirith finished the sentence. Every human ship in the sector turned toward Keth 7. The Ahimsa, the Holdfast, the Small Hours, the Clementine. It was not enough. It was nowhere close to enough. But they went anyway. The evacuation was chaos. Human crews worked in shifts that blurred into one continuous nightmare of loading, launching, and going back for more. Tyrak families clutched their children and their glass artifacts and boarded human ships that were never designed for passengers. Riku Tanaka set up triage stations in cargo bays. Bina Asha organized food distribution from supplies they could not spare. The flare hit early. The Clementine was still in orbit when the first wave of radiation swept across the system. The ship's captain made a decision in 3 seconds. She positioned the Clementine between the flare and the last evacuation transport, using the ship's hull as a radiation shield. The transport escaped. The Clementine absorbed the full force of the blast. The crew survived. The ship did not. It drifted out of Keth 7 as a blackened, silent ruin. Its engines dead, its hull cracked and glowing with residual heat. 14,000 Tyrak were alive, packed into ships that groaned under the weight, but alive. Back at the lattice ring, Lyra stood on the Ahimsa's observation deck and looked out at the stars. Dara found the Pale One there, motionless as always, and waited. I have watched 10,000 species, Lirith said. Most of them ask what the galaxy can give them. Your people keep asking what they can give the galaxy. A pause. That is either very foolish or very dangerous. I have not yet decided which. Dara looked at the stars and thought about the Clementine burning in the dark. Maybe it is both, she said. The gifts arrived without warning. A Fenari cargo ship appeared at the Ahimsa's docking port carrying 200 tons of fresh food and a handwritten note from Pell, the colony leader on Reth 4. The note said 3 words: "The soil remembers." The next day, a sorcerer tanker delivered purified water and chemical supplies. After that, a convoy of Tyrak ships brought hull, plating, and engine parts. Then the Vellani came. OSA's refugee fleet, still battered and patched, pulled alongside the human ships and offloaded fuel cells that they had scraped together from their own thin reserves. Dara stood in the Ahimsa's cargo bay, surrounded by supplies from 4 different species, and pressed her hands against her face. She had expected resistance. She had planned for rejection. She had not planned for this. "They are repaying you," Lyrith said from the doorway. The Pale One had become a permanent fixture on the ship, drifting through corridors like a ghost made of paper and silence. This is how loyalty begins. Not with treaties, with trust. But trust was exactly what the Concord feared, gone pushed harder than ever. In closed sessions, he argued that humanity was building a coalition of minor species that could destabilize the entire sector. The Rethani had spent centuries maintaining their position through military strength, and now a feral species with 4 broken ships was threatening that order simply by being kind. It was intolerable. The vote to revoke humanity's observer status was scheduled. If it passed, the human fleet would be expelled from the sector and the Sol system would be placed under permanent quarantine. No contact, no trade, no way out. Earth would be locked behind a wall of silence again. This time on purpose, Dara prepared to fight the vote. She prepared arguments, evidence, testimonials from a species they had helped. She was ready for a political battle. The galaxy had a different plan. The warning signal came from the hollow corridor, a vast, empty stretch of space where no species lived and no ships traveled. Deep space sensors detected something massive moving through the region. Something old, an automated weapon platform, built by a species that had gone extinct thousands of years ago, designed with one simple purpose. When population density in a region exceeded a certain threshold, the weapon activated and sterilized everything within range. It had been dormant for millennia. Now it was awake, and it was heading straight for the lattice ring. The Concord erupted into panic. Emergency sessions ran around the clock. The Rethani wanted to assemble a battle fleet and attack head-on. The Adhari wanted to try communicating with the machine. The Pale One said nothing, as usual, and while the politicians argued, the weapon kept moving. Dara didn't sleep for 2 days. She pulled every piece of information she could find about the weapon from the Galactic archives. It was massive, the size of a small moon, and it operated on ancient automated logic. No crew, no consciousness, just sensors and programming. It tracked targets by heat signatures and electromagnetic output. Where it found life, it erased it, but its programming was old, rigid, built for a simpler time. She brought her plan to the Concord floor. Not a military plan, an engineering plan. If the fleet could generate a false electromagnetic signal, something big enough to look like a thriving civilization, they could lure the weapon away from the lattice ring and into an empty system. Once there, it could be dismantled piece by piece. The plan required every ship in the sector to work together. Human ships, Fenari ships, Sorcerer ships, Vellani ships, Tyrak ships, even Rethani ships. Every vessel broadcasting in coordination to create one massive deception. It required precision. It required timing. Most of all, it required trust between species that had never trusted each other before. Gon stood up. His scarred face was tight with contempt. "You want us to follow a feral engineer into battle? Against a planet-killing machine? Based on a theory?" "Yes," Dara said. "This is absurd." Then OSA stood. The old Vellani captain, gray and scarred, rose from her seat in the observer gallery where the minor species were allowed to watch, but not speak. Speaking was a violation of protocol. She did not care. "The humans came for my people when every one of you turned us away," OSA said. Her voice was rough and steady. "They gave us food from their own stores, fuel from their own ships. They asked for nothing. So when this woman says she has a plan, I believe her, and I will follow her into the dark." The Fenari delegates stood, then the Sorcerer, then the Tyrak. One by one, the small species rose. The forgotten ones, the ones nobody had answered. They stood for the people who had answered them. Gon looked around the chamber. The Red Honey fleet was the largest in the sector, but without the smaller ships providing the distributed signal network, his warships would be shooting blind at a target they couldn't kill. He needed them, and they were following the feral engineer, but he sat in silence for a long moment. Then he let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a growl. "Fine," he said, "but if we die, I am blaming you personally." The combined fleet jumped to the hollow corridor 12 hours later. 47 ships from 9 species, arranged in a formation that had never been attempted before, heading toward a weapon that had killed civilizations. Dara sat in the command chair of the Ahimsa and watched the stars stretch into lines as the ship entered warp. "No pressure," Riku said from beside her. "None at all," Dara replied, and her hands did not shake. 47 ships hung in the blackness of the hollow corridor, and for a long, terrible moment, everything was quiet. Then the sensors screamed. The weapon emerged from behind a dead planet like a second moon, pulling itself free from orbit. It was ancient and ugly, a sphere of pitted metal and exposed machinery covered in scars older than most civilizations. Towers jutted from its surface like broken teeth. Lights flickered across its body in patterns that meant nothing to anyone alive. It moved slowly, but did not need speed. It had patience. It had been killing for longer than humanity had existed. Dara watched it on the Ahimsa's main display and felt her stomach drop. The archives had described the weapon. Seeing it was different. It was the size of a city. It was the size of a threat that could not be punched or outrun or reasoned with. "All ships," she said into the fleet channel, "begin signal pattern on my mark." The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Every ship would broadcast a specific electromagnetic frequency. Alone, each signal meant nothing. Together, arranged in the right pattern at the right distance, they would mimic the signature of a populated world, a target the weapon could not ignore. They would draw it toward an empty system 3 light hours away, and once it committed to the approach, they would shut down the signal and let the weapon's own momentum carry it past the kill zone, while strike teams disabled its core systems. Simple on paper, suicidal in practice. "Mark," Dara said. The fleet lit up. 47 ships broadcasting at full power, painting a picture of life across the void. Fenari agricultural ships repurposed their soil scanners into signal boosters. Sorcerer vessels used their water filtration harmonics to provide the right frequency modulation. Tyrak glass ships reflected and amplified the signal like living mirrors. And the Red Honey warships, bristling with weapons they were not supposed to use, held position and added their military-grade comm arrays to the chorus. The weapon noticed IT turned. Slowly at first, like a sleeping animal lifting its head. Then faster. Towers on its surface rotated, pointing toward the fall signal. Lights changed from flickering to steady. It was targeting. "It is taking the bait," Rikus said, his voice tight. "Hold formation," Dara ordered. Nobody moves. The weapon accelerated toward them. The fleet began its slow retreat, pulling the monster toward the empty system like fishermen dragging something enormous toward shore. For 20 minutes, it worked perfectly. The weapon followed. The fleet moved. The distance to the kill zone closed. Then the weapon split apart. Sections of its surface detached and became independent units, each one the size of a large ship, each carrying its own weapons and sensors. 12 smaller machines spread out in a hunting pattern, targeting different parts of the signal grid. The ancient builders had planned for deception that a Fenari cruiser took the first hit. A beam of white light cut through its port side, and the ship spun away, venting atmosphere. Dara heard shouting on the comms in 3 languages. "It is adapting," Lyrith said. The Pale One stood at the back of the bridge, watching everything with those timeless eyes. "You must change your approach." Dara's mind raced. The weapon was targeting individual signal sources now. If the fleet stayed spread out, it would pick them off one by one. But if they compressed the formation, they would be too close together, and one hit could destroy multiple ships, unless that was the answer. "All ships, collapse formation," Dara said. "Compress the signal grid. Bring everything to a single point." The fleet channel exploded with protests. Moving closer together was insane. They would be one target instead of 47. That is exactly what I want, Dara said. One target, one signal, so bright and so loud that every unit locks onto the same point. Then we fire everything we have into the core while it is focused on us. Silence on the channel. Then Gon's voice, rough and almost amused. If I die following a feral engineer's plan, he said, at least it will be an interesting death. The fleet compressed. Ships moved dangerously close, their hulls almost touching. The combined signal blazed like a newborn star. Every detached unit stopped hunting individual ships and turned toward the concentrated source. The weapon's ancient processors tried to prioritize targets, but the signal was overwhelming. Too bright, too dense, too much data for systems that were built for a simpler era. Now, Dara said, the Red Hani opened fire. Every warship in the fleet unleashed everything it had at the weapon's exposed core. Beams and missiles and kinetic rounds tore into the ancient machine. The smaller units tried to defend the main body, but they were designed to hunt, not to shield. One by one, they went dark. The core shuddered, cracked, and fell silent. The hollow corridor was still, then the comms erupted. Cheering in languages Dara did not speak. Gon was laughing, a sound like rocks falling down a hill. OSA was crying, and the sorcerer were singing, that deep, beautiful vibration that traveled through water and metal and bone, filling every ship in the fleet with a sound that felt like the universe exhaling. 3 weeks later, the Concord reconvened. The vote to quarantine humanity was withdrawn. In its place, the Fenari, the Sorcerer, the Villani, and the Tyrak jointly submitted a new resolution. Full membership for humanity. Not observer status. A real seat. A real voice that IT passed. Dara sat in humanity's new chair in the Concord chamber. She had asked for something simple. While every other seat was shaped for a specific species, built from exotic materials and designed to impress, humanity's seat was a plain wooden chair. Oak, shipped from Earth. It looked absurd among the alien thrones. It looked perfect. Lyrith approached her after the ceremony. I have decided, the Pale One said. You are not foolish. You are not dangerous. You are something I have not seen in 10,000 years. What is that? Dara asked. Necessary. That evening, Dara stood on the Ahimsa's observation deck and looked out at the galaxy. The Clementine was rebuilt, patched together with parts donated by 9 different species. The Holdfast had new engines. The Small Hours had been repainted by Tyrak artists, its hull covered in swirling glass patterns that caught the light of every star it passed. She opened a channel to the fleet. There are still beacons out there, she said. Still people waiting. Still silence that needs an answer. She paused. She smiled. Where to next?